You pull a carrot from the refrigerator crisper drawer, and it bends in your hand, rubbery, soft, fit only for the barrow. The modern machine promises to keep our harvest fresh. Instead, it slowly ruins a good vegetable. The cold is there, but the air is wrong. Let me be straight with you. I have pulled many thousands of carrots from the monastery beds over 40 years. We keep them firm straight through the long winter. When we bring the autumn harvest to the storeroom door, the very first thing we do is take the knife to them. We cut the green tops off, right down to the crown. We do this immediately, before anything else. Those leaves are still living, and they are thirsty. If you leave them attached, they will draw the moisture right out of the root. So, short and plain, the greens must go. But even with the tops gone, a cold drawer is not a true resting place. Come with me past the bakehouse, down into the old storeroom. The walls here are thick fieldstone. The floor is packed earth and heavy slate. In late October, before the heavy frost takes hold, the air inside is cool, heavy, and completely still. It smells of old wood, dry dust, and resting soil. This is where the harvest comes. We leave the winter roots unwashed. We only brush the loose dirt off with a heavy glove. Washing them under a tap will spoil the flesh. So they sit in the barrow, hard and quiet, waiting for the dark. A carrot pulled from the garden bed does not know it has been harvested. It only knows it has been stripped of its heavy, damp blanket. The modern kitchen drawer gives it harsh light and dry, moving air. That is ruin to a good vegetable. To keep a harvest firm straight through the hungry gap, you must give it back what it lost. You must hide it from the air. The older brother who kept the beds before me showed me the old way. No machines, no expensive cellars, just deep wooden boxes lined up along the north wall. We fill those boxes with damp sand. It sounds too simple to work, but the earth has a memory. A root is mostly water and stored sugar. If it loses that water to the dry air, the cells collapse. It shrivels. If it sits in a puddle, the skin breaks down and it turns to mush. That is the delicate balance we must strike in the storeroom. Roots need humidity to stay crisp, but standing moisture rots them. Put a winter carrot in a sealed jar, and it will sweat. Mold takes hold quickly. Put that same harvest on a bare wooden shelf, and the moving air steals its life. Sand solves this entirely. When you pack a vegetable in sand, you create a tiny, perfect climate around it. The sand forms a heavy barrier against the dry air of the room. It physically stops the moisture inside the root from escaping. But sand is not heavy clay. It is broken stone. It has space between the hard grains. Sand breathes and holds just enough moisture to suspend the vegetable in time. It pulls the excess dampness away from the delicate skin. I learned this the hard way early on. I once tried wrapping roots in wet cloth in a cellar basin to keep them plump. They were black and foul within a single month. The mistake is kindness. We think giving them standing water will keep them fresh and firm. But severed roots do not want to drink. They only want to sleep. The sand simply tricks the harvest into thinking it is still buried deep in the autumn earth. The temperature stays perfectly even. The harsh light is completely gone. Under these quiet conditions, the biological breakdown of the flesh simply stops. The root waits patiently in the dark. But knowing the principle is not the same as avoiding the common trap. I remember my second autumn working the beds. I was young, and I wanted everything to look perfect. We had a heavy yield of late carrots. I pulled them from the heavy clay and took them straight to the pump in the courtyard. I stood there in the cold wind. I took a hard bristle brush and scrubbed every bit of earth away. I washed them under the rushing water until they gleamed bright orange. I piled them into a heavy tin bucket. I carried that bucket of freshly scrubbed carrots into the storehouse. The older brother was waiting by the wooden bins. He looked at my bright, clean bucket. He did not smile. He picked up one wet carrot. He pointed out the tiny scratches on the bright skin. He told me I had just destroyed the root's natural protection. A carrot in the earth has a tough, living skin. The fine soil clings to it and forms a natural shield. When you take a hard brush to a root, you strip that shield away. You bruise the surface. You open hundreds of tiny wounds in the firm flesh. Every one of those scratches is a door. You are simply inviting the damp rot to come inside. He was right. By late December, they were lost. They turned black and slippery. The decay spread rapidly from one ruined root to the next. I lost the entire bucket. I ruined good winter pottage out of pure vanity. The garden soil is not filth. It is a covering. When we strip it away prematurely, we leave the harvest completely defenseless. I never made that foolish choice again. He showed me how to treat the root exactly as it was when it left the soil. We begin with a heavy container. A deep wooden bin is the old way, but a thick plastic bucket from your shed will do the exact same work. It must be clean. It must be completely sound. No cracks in the side, no holes in the bottom. Then you must source the sand. This is a trap I fell into myself early on. I went to the hardware shop and bought a heavy bag of rough, uncleaned sand. Do not do this. It is often full of harsh grit and sharp debris. That harsh grit will rest directly against the delicate skin of your winter food. You must only use proper, clean sand. It is plain, it is right for cold storage, and it is safe. The sand must be damp. But the word damp is a trap. If you make it wet, you will build a swamp in your bucket. I use a clean barrow in the courtyard to prepare the sand. I pour the dry bags in, and I add water very slowly from a small tin. I turn it with a heavy garden spade. You want it barely damp. When you take a heavy handful and squeeze it hard in your fist, it should hold its shape. But water must never ever drip through your fingers. If a single drop falls, add more dry sand until the balance is right. Bring this prepared sand down into your quiet storeroom. Now we build the layers. Put a deep layer of the damp sand at the very bottom of your bucket. Pack it down flat with your bare hands. This is the foundation. It protects the lowest tier of food from resting against the hard, unyielding plastic or wood. Take your roots from the barrow. Brush the loose dirt off with your glove. Do not wash them. Lay them flat on the surface of the sand. Here is the exact measure you must follow. The roots must absolutely never touch each other. Not at the pointed tip and not at the flat crown. Leave a clear gap of bare sand between every single root. They must not touch the sides of the bucket either. I learned this from losing good food. If they touch, you create a bridge. If a single root softens in the dark, the rot will walk right across that physical bridge. It will ruin the neighbor, and then the next, until the whole tier is black and ruined. Once your first row is settled, you bury them. Pour another inch of damp sand evenly over the top. Use your hands to spread it. Make sure the heavy sand falls into every gap between the roots. Press it down gently, firm enough to push the empty air out, but do not crush the flesh. Then lay your next row. Alternate the layers. Sand, then unwashed roots, then sand again. It is a slow, steady rhythm. You build it up, tier by tier, in the dark. When you reach the top of the bucket, you must stop laying food. Leave a generous space below the rim. Fill that final space with nothing but pure, damp sand. Pack it smooth and flat. This thick top layer is the absolute seal. It stops the dry air of the room from reaching down into the buried harvest. Leave the heavy bucket where it sits. The physical packing is done. But there is one detail about this bucket that dictates whether you eat in January or throw it all to the compost. The work of the monastery is quiet. We do not often shout over the heavy noise of the world, but the garden gate is always open. Come and walk with me again. We share the hard labor, the cold frost, and the steady turning of the seasons. I only pass on the plain habits the older brothers handed down to me in the dirt. If this is proving useful, do me the kindness of subscribing. I put out what I have learned in this garden every week, and I would be glad of your company. Now, let us get back to that bucket. The heavy bucket sitting in the dark. You have built your layers. You have packed the sand. But the true test is the water you trapped inside. The precise measure of that dampness dictates everything. I said earlier, the sand must hold its shape in your fist. Let me press this further. The sand must be barely damp, never dripping or clumping heavily. Damp sand feels like the deep soil of a woodland bed just after the morning dew has lifted. It is cool to the bare hand. It has weight, but it does not shine. If you look into your bin and see a bright gloss on the grains, you have crossed the line. Wet sand is a tomb. A sleeping root needs to breathe through its tough skin. Water fills the tiny spaces between the broken stone. If those spaces are flooded, the root suffocates. Excess moisture will rot the entire bucket. The skin will soften in the cold dark. The firm flesh will turn to a black, smelling paste. If you dig down into the bin in January and the sand comes up in solid, wet bricks, the balance is broken. It must always crumble easily off your heavy glove. Which brings me to the surest ways to lose your harvest. There are a few ways this goes wrong, and I will share them all with you right here. The first is wet sand. We already know it drowns the harvest. It turns a quiet resting place into a heavy-smelling swamp. The solid flesh turns to a black paste, and the rot takes over the entire bucket. The second failure brings us all the way back to the storeroom door. The green tops. I once packed beautiful winter carrots into a heavy wooden bin with those thick, lush leaves still fully attached. I thought it looked abundant. It was a fatal error. Those green leaves do not stop living just because you bury them in the dark. They remain terribly thirsty. They need deep water to survive the winter. They will draw the moisture right out of the carrot itself. You will dig down into the cold sand in February expecting firm food for your pottage, and you will pull out a rubbery, hollow string. The root will simply fold over your bare hand. Cut them off. Take a heavy field knife. Shear every single top right down to the flat crown. Leave absolutely nothing green attached to the vegetable. The third failure is a mistake of vanity, which we spoke of earlier, washing the roots. When you scrub the soil away, you open 100 tiny doors for the rot to enter. Always pack them unwashed. And the final failure is ignoring the air outside the bucket. Even if you do all this perfectly, there is one absolute limit. I am not an agricultural scientist. The sand does the physical work, but sand does not make cold air. If you leave this heavy bin in a warm hallway, the earth will simply hold the heat. The winter root will wake up. It will sprout thin, pale hairs into the sand and then rot in the dark. The bucket must live in a cold, dark place like a basement or shed. The air around it must sit just above freezing. It must be cold enough to force the harvest into a deep sleep, but it cannot drop below the freezing mark. If the root freezes solid inside the bin, the inner cells shatter. When the room thaws, you will pull out nothing but liquid mush. You must find the quiet, cold spot, relying on your own judgment of your local climate An unheated cellar, a low corner against a heavy stone wall. Keep a glass thermometer on the shelf nearby. Watch it when the hard winter comes. If the bitter frost creeps into the room, throw a heavy wool blanket over the plastic. If the early spring warms the floor, you must move the bin. The temperature must hold steady. But when you find that right corner in your shed, something shifts. When the heavy snow falls in January, the modern man goes out to the market. He pays hard money for tired vegetables. Those roots have traveled a long road. They were lifted from strange earth, wrapped in plastic, and shipped across the country. They are a poor substitute for what you tended with your own hands. Consider the old way. A bag of clean sand costs only a few dollars. You buy it once. You use a sturdy bucket already sitting in your shed. That is your entire expense. With it, your own carrots can stay crisp for up to 6 months. You bypass the crowded shop entirely. You ignore the limp food resting under the bright lights. The cost is small. But the savings are not the true reward. The real value is keeping the continuity of your own soil on your table. You eat the fruit of your own garden straight through the hungry gap. Your steady labor in the spring feeds you in the dark of winter. It is a quiet independence. Your labor for this weekend is plain and simple. Find a clean, sound bucket in your shed. Go and secure a single heavy bag of clean sand. Bring them both to your storehouse before the ground freezes solid. Clear a low shelf. Prepare the quiet corner where they will rest. That is all it takes to begin. Then, tell me below, because I read everything you write. What roots are coming out of your garden this week? Are you pulling heavy beets from the cold clay or late turnips? Write it down. The seasons turn and the steady work goes on. The garden gate is always open. Come and walk with me again.